Okay, so I'm going to fill the rest of this hole with epoxy now that I've replaced my other cartridge with a high sol. But one thing also you may have noticed in the last video, there was nothing placed here. There should normally be this little plus piece. That used to be for holding the servo, but we're not even using a servo anymore. Even still though, it's nice because it's this little reservoir that can hold epoxy and allow epoxy to kind of droop over the edges of this syringe hole. And that keeps, if there's any water that's leaking in between the syringe and the hole that the syringe is in, that epoxy will kind of keep that from happening. It's really important that you make it concentric. I try to make it so the syringe is right in the middle of the hole. It doesn't need much glue, obviously. This is just going to kind of hold it in place, but once the epoxy is there, that'll kind of sure things up. So there's that. And it doesn't take much. Also, if you want, you can put like a little piece of toothpick or wire or something in this hole to keep epoxy from going into that hole. You want to keep that hole open so that it works as a vent port. Or if you just want to be really careful, you can just very carefully kind of put epoxy around the edge. So you can kind of see I'm just letting it droop in. I'm not allowing it to go into the top hole. Oh wait, almost did. It's hard to see with the camera there. If it did start going in the hole, I could probably just wipe it off. Also, you'll notice, I mean, it's a fluid. This epoxy, as it settles, will kind of flatten out. So even though it looks like kind of a droopy hill now, it'll end up flattening and being really almost as if it were just filled with a thin liquid over time. So that hole's still visible. Later on, if I'm looking at it and it's making me nervous, I might come and just like put a toothpick in there. Now I'm also going to start filling this hole. Let's just start doing that now. So we're going to just fill it to the brim. I always like kind of injecting it into where the wires are. I have plenty of, there's no rush with this glue. It works really slowly. So you can kind of do a job and then later on we can do the cleanup. We can, you know, wipe off the little excess bits that around the hole. So there's a little bit. Now I'm going to work this around a little bit. And I also like to have, I mean, if you have an extra piece of string or a toothpick or a wire, if you look around, every once in a while you see these little bubbles. They're not too much of a problem. There's a tiny one right here. And you can just
see it really quick.
You can see that there's kind of a bubble, and they're not too much of a problem, but if you burst them, you know, it'll make it look cleaner afterward. And just work this around, plunge it a little bit. That'll work out other bubbles. Here's another little bubble that's forming on this side. There's 1, 2, 3. I'm a little bit obsessive here. I mean, the big problem would be if what looked like a bubble was actually a channel that was, you know, leading to an air pocket that water could get through, but it's not really the case. And then lastly, now that this is a pretty good amount of epoxy, I have a paper towel. I just like to kind of clean up around the edges. So, you know, mostly this is aesthetic. If you just left the blobs there, it really wouldn't matter. Functionally, everything would work the same, but being as I am, I like to have things be clean. So here we go. And again, you're going to have to constantly babysit this. Well, not constantly, you're going to have to periodically babysit it. So as this is drying up, there's like 3 things that I'm looking for. I'm making sure that the wires are still not touching any edges of the hole. I'm making sure that epoxy is not wandering out and getting beyond this hot glue barrier that I've made. And I'm looking for bubbles and popping bubbles that may form just because it's aesthetically pleasing. I'd say that also periodically it's good to kind of wiggle things around for the first maybe half an hour or so. That's when the epoxy is just completely viscous. It hasn't really even hardened up at all. After about a half an hour, you can probably stop wiggling it around because that's when the epoxy is going to start trying to firm up. And you can see this is flattened out now too. I don't even need to put something in that hole because it looks like it's not gonna pour into it. So there we go. Now we just check on it every 20 minutes or so. Yay!